Alpin Hong is an internationally renowned pianist, and he's also a music education advocate. Let's welcome Alpin Hong to the Zoom stage.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alpin Hong, and it is such a privilege to be here with all of you for the Emerging Leaders Summit. I've been a touring concert pianist for the last 19 years, and I'd like to begin my session by performing a socially distanced piece for you. Malagueña by Ernesto Lecuona was a traditional classical piece that was championed by virtuosos like Liberace. But I'd like to play you my version, Malagueña in the Age of COVID. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope the sound came through. There's actually no way for me to tell how that sounded over the internet, but I hope you enjoyed that. I wanted to talk to you a little bit on the topic of courage. Now, when I was assigned this, I didn't know whether I was the right person to talk about it. But as I was thinking over my life story, I realized that there were certain decisions that I made that drastically altered my life path, that weren't exactly the most obvious ones to take. So to go back to my childhood, my parents, like many, emigrated here in the 1970s. I was born in 1976 in New Jersey, and my parents raised me later in Michigan as a child. And as many of you may have had this experience, I was one of the very, very few Korean Americans in our town of Battle Creek and Kalamazoo, relatively small places. And I grew up that piano playing Korean kid because my parents started me on classical violin and piano lessons at the age of 4. Now, I lived, I think, quite a life in Eden. Everyone I knew was from the same church and the same home. But when I was 12 years old, tragedy befell me, and unfortunately, I lost both my parents in an auto accident. Now, this is one of those moments, of course, where the world completely changed. All of the safety and security that I've been raised to have was taken, and I had a younger brother to take care of. We were eventually adopted by my aunt in Southern California, and so I moved to Los Angeles in the summer of 1989. Now, I went from, as I said, a very safe church community, a school, a Seventh-day Adventist school, about 140 kids from kindergarten through 12th grade, and I went to the LA Unified School District the year before the LA riots happened, and my middle school, which was only 6th through 8th grade, had 3,200 students in it. So if you had taken me and dropped me off on Mars, it couldn't have been a more destabilizing time for me in my life. And craving that stability so much, and my father was a family psychiatrist in Michigan, and being a Korean American male, I had this impulse, of course, to go into medicine, to follow his footsteps and have a lifetime of financial and social stability. So I ended up applying and getting into UCLA, and as a psychology major, and I thought that I was set, my path was laid in front of me. But what I quickly realized was what I had lost. I continued to play piano through high school, and I would enter those high school kid competitions like that. But then for the first time in my life, I was forced to face losing music forever and losing the thing that made me feel special, the idea of performing and connecting to people. And I didn't realize that I needed that until I was on the verge of losing it. So at the end of my matriculation, this was probably the third year, I was kind of depressed, even though I wasn't self-aware enough to admit it to myself, but I didn't know what was missing. And I started to try to do lots of things to fill that hole. I was doing extreme sports. I was on a rollerblade stunt team. I was doing musical theater, anything I could do to get that impulse out. And so one night, I was wandering through the UCLA campus. I happened to wander into the music building there, Schoenberg Hall. And because I had not been even had the chance to practice on the pianos because I wasn't a music major. They wouldn't let non-music majors desecrate their precious instruments. But I saw a classroom door that was open, and I just kind of went into it. And I saw this beautiful Steinway piano. It was unlocked, to prevent, as I said, non-music majors from ruining it. And it just happened to be open. It was my first chance to touch the piano, perhaps in a year or so. And so I sat down there in the dark and I started playing for myself, recapturing the feeling of what it was like to just connect with the instrument, something that was so dear to me since childhood. In the middle of it, I was interrupted by this voice behind me. "Excuse me, young man, but who are you?" Tapped me on the shoulder, and I kind of looked around nervously, and I said, "Oh, I know one." He says, "Are you a music major at this school?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you play piano wonderfully. Would you consider playing for the intermission of our upcoming chorale concert?" Now, this man was Dr. Donald Dewin. He was the conductor of the UCLA chorale, and at the time, the LA Master Chorale, so an eminent scholar. And he asked me whether I knew the Moonlight Sonata, which I didn't. But I said, "Yes, I know it." And he said, "Oh, great. Well, the concert is in a month and a half. It'll be at a big performance hall downtown, and we'll see you there." So I learned, for the first public performance in maybe 4 years, the Moonlight Sonata, which is a famous piece, but I'd never played it. And of course, those of you that know it, there are 3 movements. And the first one that everybody knows is kind of the easiest one, but the third one, so I had to learn this piece. And so I was very nervous. This is the first audience I'd played for in several years. I show up to the performance. And unbeknownst to me, the piano at the hall, the third leg had snapped off a couple performances ago. But some genius thought that, well, we'll just super glue that third leg on. Now, a typical piano weighs about 1,000 pounds. And in the middle of the most beautiful part of it, the thing started to shake and then it snapped off. So the entire piano hit the ground. The stick holding the lid broke. The lid slammed down and the entire piano hit the ground with a huge crash. And, it was a largely Korean crowd that was in the audience. And you could hear these gasps like, "Oh no, oh no," in the audience. "Oh my God, oh my God." And I was looking at this wreck and I was like, well, what am I going to do? I guess for me, the concert is over. But I thought, you know what? Let's just have some of the bigger singers come and pick up the piano for me and put it back on the leg. And I asked them to hold it. I was able to finish the piece. I got one of the best standing ovations of my life. But what happened was the Korean Consul General to the United States was in the audience. And a couple months later, I got a call from the Korean government asking me whether I would consider playing with the KBS Symphony Orchestra on live TV for a government show that was going to celebrate Koreans in other nations. They asked me whether I knew that Tchaikovsky piano concerto, right? And I said, sure, even though I'd never played it in my life. So then I had 3 months to put this together. And my first public performance on screen, on stage, was in front of my nation's motherland, in front of my entire Korean extended family, playing Tchaikovsky piano concerto, which all of you know that play piano is basically the Korean national anthem. And that was the one point where I thought, well, maybe a chance of a life in music might be possible. And so this was the first of the, I wouldn't call it courageous, perhaps desperate steps at the time, was I decided to jump off my medical track and apply to the two music programs I had heard of, Manhattan School of Music and the Juilliard School. Now, those are obviously some of the greatest music schools in the world. And I asked my old piano teacher to help me drum up an old, program of high school pieces that I know and a couple more to fill the requirements. Now, I don't have enough time to describe the whole story to you, but miraculously, I was able to fool the jury. They let me in, and I entered the Master's of Music program at Juilliard. Now, when I got to New York City, of course, I remember thinking as soon as I walked into the lobby, I dropped my suitcases, and I thought to myself, whatever I do in my career, I never want to forget how grateful I am for this chance. And that every decision that I make from now on is for this idea that is not only about me and how, to get people to clap for me, but to be able to use my experience and story to change people's lives if I can. So while I was at school, I started something called Kitchen Sing Music in Harlem. Now, this was taking disadvantaged kids that were considered to be at risk, where they consider their homes to not be a safe place. Now, I had no idea. I had no educational experience. I had never taught before in any school setting or anything. But I was forced to take on these 14 to 15 kids that were considered at risk. Some of them had behavioral issues, and be able to inspire them through music. Now, this was a learning experience, but in this time, I realized just how hungry some people are for the experience of music. And, like I said, I'm so here to talk about courage, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily a courageous reason why I went to it. I just thought, well, this is a need that needs to be filled here in the community, and I'm one of the unique people. I'm one of the few people at Juilliard that actually lived there. I lived in Spanish Harlem at the time, and so I was just like, why don't we just do this in the neighborhood? I see these kids are out on the street afterward. Maybe we can give them something to do. And then, right before I graduated, I was like, you know what? I'm going to enter a competition. I'm going to ditch class to enter a competition. So I ditched my piano studio class to go across the street and enter the Concert Artists Guild competition. The piece that I chose for this was the Superstar Etude #1. Now, this piece was my final piece for it. And in this piece, at the end, you use one of your feet to hit chords like this with your foot. And you're supposed to sing like Elvis at the end. You're supposed to go like, whoa, baby, whoa, baby. Now, I'm going up against Juilliard faculty. There were 2 Juilliard faculty that were entering the competition, and some of the best soloists from around the world in every instrument combination imaginable, a recorder quartet, opera singers, rock stars, all these kinds of things. And I fooled the jury again. They gave me first place. And that first prize was my debut in Carnegie Hall, my first recording, and 3 years of commission-free management, which allowed me to launch my career. Now, when I got into the performing world, I realized, first of all, who I was as an Asian American pianist. I realized that I was hardly unique. There was a lot of, even specifically Korean American pianists that had incredible technical skill and played Rock 3 when they were 8 years old. Some of them were homeschooled and practiced 10 hours a day, which I certainly didn't do because Nintendo Entertainment System came out when I was 7, and there was no way that Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart could compete with Mario and Zelda and Metroid, right? So I had a very different background than some of my colleagues that were out there. And so I started to think, well, since everyone is playing, all the Beethoven sonatas or the Goldberg variations, I thought, well, why don't I play the music that I loved growing up? And you heard some of those things in what I played for you: Jurassic Park, Star Wars, Super Mario Brothers, Zelda. For those of you that are born in the 80s, I'm sure you might have caught a lot of those. And so this whole idea that, comparing myself, right, to everyone else in a competitive way was not going to be fruitful, but to say that perhaps I might be able to add to the tapestry of music. And the one time I did this was, again, taking into stock of who I am. I'm a Korean American pianist. On my first tour that I really did, a major tour, I played 95 concerts in 38 states in about 8 months. And in concert number 93, I ended up in this small town in Texas. And I played the same program so many times. I was getting tired of it. I thought, well, let's do something to entertain myself. And I thought, well, the audience doesn't know anything about me other than my name, Alpin Hong, and my picture that I'm obviously Asian. I was like, well, let's mess with their expectations a little bit. And so I, went on stage and I pretended like I was fresh off the boat. I went on and said, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very nice to be here in Texas, USA #1. And the audience, they responded so warmly. You could hear them in the audience saying like, oh, honey, he speaks so well. Look at that young man up there speaking our language. Bless his heart. And, and I did the whole concert that way. But right at the very end, before I was going to play my keynote piece, I was going to play Rhapsody in Blue. And I went on stage, I said, well, y'all, it's been wonderful to be here. I wasn't born here in Texas, but I got here as soon as I could. Y'all come back now, you hear? And there was like 5 seconds of dead silence. And I thought to myself, oh no, I've gone too far. But right when I started getting uncomfortable, this gentleman in the third row in a 10-gallon hat stood up, took his hat, threw it down on the ground, and said, son, you had me fooled. And the audience started dying. And I got one of the best standing ovations of my life. And it's a place that has re-engaged me 6 times since that time. So I realized that audiences, even in classical concerts, when they have this ingrained expectation about what a performance is be, all they really crave is that connection with the person performing for them, right? And for classical music, it's a little bit more difficult because these are literally songs without words at the piano. And so I started to kind of revolutionize the way that I brought my program by giving people some verbal context. Now, I thought, first, well, maybe I'll just tell people, a little about the composer, when they died, when they lived and when they died. But then I realized that wasn't what people were going into. Like that, they could look at the liner notes or they could look it up later. It's more along the line, they wanted to know who I was. And they were fascinated about how I got to be here and what my story would be. And so I started to take that to its ultimate end, which was eventually, I said, well, since people enjoy the speaking part and the storytelling part of my performance so much, why don't I make a performance that kind of flips the percentages, where instead of 80% performing and 20% talking, why don't I make a show that is 80% storytelling and maybe enhanced by 20 to 25% of me performing on the piano. And so I made a theatrical show about my life, a one-man theatrical show called Chasing Chopin. We debuted it in Atlanta. And I'm thrilled to say that it got picked up across the country. I got to perform it at Lincoln Center. I got to play it at my hometown of Kalamazoo in Battle Creek, Michigan, as a guest at the Gilmore Keyboard Festival, and it's continuing to tour the nation right now. So as you can see, these risks that I did. Now, all of these things could have been utter failures, right? I don't know if I was an actor. I wasn't necessarily trained as such. But it made me, again, think about how we have to adapt ourselves to what our personality is and how we can apply that not only maybe to our academic track, but our career. Because as you all know, the job market and the academic market is changing daily, and no tactical bomb has been as devastating to the status quo as the COVID virus, particularly for classical music. It has, as you know, obliterated the ability to perform live in front of crowds. And we're not going to be able to do that for the time being. But so I've seen a lot of my compatriots try to overcome this by, of course, giving concerts at home. And that is part of the reason why I agreed to be able to speak through and hopefully perform to you. I hope that the performance came through online. I have no idea what it sounds like on your end. And it is very unnatural for me to play for this glowing screen instead of being able to breathe and experience the performance with all of you. The other thing that I decided to do was, you know what, everyone has all these, kind of Zoom performances where they put 9 people together, and all I have is myself here at home. So I thought, you know what, let's make a video of me playing with myself at home. That's probably not the best way to put it, but I played a piano duet with me playing on both sides. I was piano 1 and piano 2. And I was like, you know what, let's mess it up a little bit. I like dressing up in costumes. So I was like, I dressed up as Deadpool as for piano 2. And I put this video together in order to show people kind of the experience of what it was like performing, with somebody else But again, like inserting a little bit of my geek nerd self into this normally very respectable thing. So again, like what I'm talking about is risk. And now I want to kind of connect it to today's themes. We're talking about emerging roles in leadership and the ability to take the values that we are learning from these sessions today and be able to apply it in a more general way if you're a medical student, if you want to go into business, if you're not even going to go into higher education at all, and you're trying to figure out what it is that you want to do. I think the hardest thing to do is to be honest with yourself. That is something that I think a lot of us don't do because obviously when we're kids, our parents tell us what to do. And for some of us that have, Korean parents, that pressure doesn't stop at elementary school, middle school, high school, college, because of course then they have pressures about who you're supposed to marry, what kind of house you're supposed to have, what kind of car you're supposed to drive, and so on and so forth. That's the Korean way, right? And so sometimes it's very hard for us to imagine when you have to make decisions for yourself, but eventually all of us have to do that, right? And we have to take risks. All of us is going to have to perform at some time in your life. You're going to have to apply to college. You're going to have to negotiate for a salary in a job. You're going to have to ask someone out for a date, right? or accept that date, right? And these are huge risks, right? With huge pitfalls. But I think if you have an honest self-awareness for yourself, you can be more prepared to take on these challenges that may present themselves. And it will actually give you confidence knowing your talents. Now, I used to be a Dungeons and Dragons player back in the day, and so I'm going to use kind of this example. And for any of you that play video games and you have to build like a character from nothing, you know that there's a certain there's a spec sheet, right? You had to fill out. You had a certain amount of points in intelligence. You had a certain amount of points in strength. You had a certain amount of points in wisdom and charisma, right? I think being able to look at yourself, obviously not as a fantasy character and how effective you are wielding an axe versus throwing a fireball, but to be honest with yourself about the resources and personality traits that you have. For example, if you're really uncomfortable meeting new people and being unstable, music is not for you. The world of music is not for you. For example, if you are not very detail oriented, right, and you find it hard to be able to cross every T and dot every I, accounting is probably not for you. When it comes to medicine and the types of career paths you can take in medicine, if you don't like interacting with people, surgery is probably not for you. There are other fields, even within the field of medicine, that are better. So I think taking stock of those things is, I think, a good thing for everyone to do. And so if I have a take-home message today as the last bit of advice I'd like to give you, and it would be that right after we get off or decide to stop watching the seminar, you should make a list. Make 2 columns, your strengths and your weaknesses. And the strengths is easy because we all think about what we're good at all the time, right? And the hardest thing, again, the courageous part of this is to be honest with yourself. And that's why the weakness column also comes into play. Because you can always look at the weakness column as these are the things that I can improve, that I can work on, that allow me to match what my life goals will be, right? Or you can be kind of honest with yourself and be like, you know what? These are things that are endemic to my personality. These are things that are going to be very difficult for me to change. Perhaps it's easier for me to find a community or a friend circle that can provide me the things that I don't have myself. And those are the things that you can do even socially distanced. Because of social media, because of the internet, you have a safe space to be able to connect. And the very fact that you are connected with the Korean American Coalition and the Council of Korean Americans, the types of speakers and leaders that we have in these 2 organizations alone, we're a family. Imagine a bunch of aunts and uncles that are just asking to help you, asking to make connections to you, able to give you advice that most people take 15 years and 20 years of messing up to accomplish. So I really want you to take advantage of, like I said, the contacts that you've made even today. Reach out to these organizations. They are willing to connect you to those people. And again, take that list of strengths and weaknesses that you have to be able to perhaps refine or narrow down the scope of the goals that you really want, that you really, really want. I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. I know I could speak for hours and hours and hours because this is fun, but I would like to have a little bit of Q&A session to be able to interact with all of you. And so I'm going to open it up back to Esther. She's going to ask me some questions, and hopefully we will take some from the viewing audience out there.
Wow, Alpin, I just want to say thank you so much. I know that in the chat, it was just blowing up. If everyone can just give an applause, a round of applause for Alpin. Like, he just shared so much insight, wisdom, but he's also just graced us with such an amazing performance. I don't think you guys realize, but I believe that this is probably the first live performance you guys have ever heard since quarantine. And you guys get to experience this with Alpin. So thank you so much, Alpin, for doing this. It was such a pleasure. I think the whole time I was just like this. I was just so mesmerized by your playing, and I was so encouraged. I think a part of this summit is we really want to encourage you guys, and we hope that the music that Alpin was graciously providing for us was a time of healing. It was definitely a time of healing for me.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Performance I've had since COVID started too. So you for allowing me to perform for you today.
No, it's great. I'm so glad we had the honor to listen to you. We've had so many questions come in for you. It was actually a lot, but I just want to highlight a few questions. The first being is, how has music and piano supported your mental health?
Oh.
Yeah, this is a big one because, I mean, we're talking about being courageous, but like, how does that translate to like your mental health and, you know, all of that?
Especially recently, it's funny, you know, I've been performing for so long that it is easy for me to think of it as my job, as the thing that pays my taxes, right? What I've realized about it, and it's strange, it's kind of extra musical, is a lot of people talk about the connective power of music. You ever have that experience when you meet someone, and it doesn't have to be necessarily music, but any kind of form of arts and entertainment that connect you, a movie you both love, or you know, a favorite food that you both love, and it instantly bonds you to, and you can be like, you're going to be someone I can hang with, and that is how those friendships are made. The fact that you know, it made me connect with my musician community in a way never before, strangely, because we were dealing with the tragedy of losing our world. Some people have used music obviously to get them through the solitude, right? To be able to give you that soundtrack to the emptiness that is your house. To remember that there was a time before when people used to gather in numbers and go to concerts. And there's something so humanizing about that. It actually, it allows our homes the walls to disappear from the homes, that we have these shared things that we have. And it comes to mental health. I will tell you, I struggle with it every day. I mean, I'm
same
here.
As well, same.
Yeah, I mean, and I think people who think that it's not affecting them are lying. They're not being honest with themselves. It's
I agree.
Being honest with to understand that even if you haven't lost your job, even, you know, if you got into the college of your dreams, even if you're sure about everything going forth, the uncertainty of the world, there's no way that it won't affect that the way you think and that you feel. And so what I want to say to that when it comes to music and mental health is that, first of all, yes, you want to play the music that makes you feel good about yourselves, but now is the perfect time to explore. Don't let Spotify tell you or
discover
music that you like, right?
Yeah.
Different times you might have different, you know, for those of you that haven't experienced death metal before, you might want to give it a shot. It's a really good soundtrack for right now, man. You need
my gosh, I guess you have to check it out. Check out death metal, everybody.
Yeah, you want to pick up some apocalyptic shred metal right now. Some music that makes you want to take your head and throw it through a wall. You know, for those of you who have, you know, who only do a certain type of entertainment, you know, now is the time to be able to explore something else, right?
Yeah.
You know, get away from kind of the YouTube recommendations, and this is the time to stretch out. Remember, this is old school. Remember, we used to make mixtapes for each other. Now is the time to ask your friends for the mixtape. What are you listening to? What are the stuff that you love right now? Reach out and do that now, man. You know, it's
just a text away. You can download it. They can literally send you the track right now. Now is the time for the mixtape. Then
I totally agree. I feel like come back. Let's do old
go.
school.
Let's listen to it together. We're gonna be on Zoom together. Put it in your headphones. You guys know how to put it this way, and enjoy something, experience something new together. This is the time to do it, even socially distanced.
I love that. I feel like you just hit so many good notes. It was like being vulnerable is such a strength. I feel like when you think about courage, it's not about being strong or being bold. It's about being honest with yourself and with other people. And I think during this time, oh my goodness, I think you've hit all the questions I had, and even the questions that we received from the chat box is like really taking this time to explore, get out of your comfort zone, adjust, be flexible, get creative, but don't do it in isolation.
Right. We're all so afraid.
Yeah.
That, you know what? Let's go completely the other way. Throw off the armor that we usually put on, take your sword and shield, and throw yourself into the fray. What do you have to lose?
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I really hope that this talk really encourages our attendees. I feel so bad, but we're actually closing up on Q&A session. It was quite short, but I still want to leave it on a high note because I feel like I just want to leave you guys with this. I think this is something me and Alpin talked about, and I feel like this is a quote that we really want to share. It says, success is never final. Failure is never fatal. It's the courage that counts. So I hope that this time that we got to hear about Alpin's story was just so encouraging, but also powerful. I think it inspired me to take courage day by day. So everyone, if you could just give one last round of applause for Alpin for being here with us.
We could continue this conversation one-on-one. I love, you can friend me, Instagram, all the social media stuff and everything. I'm on all those things. Find me, check me out. I would love to continue these kinds of things. And I want to close with my favorite John Wooden quote, because I actually attended one of his final games at UCLA. And when I was there, we won the national championship. He was sitting there in the front row. And the quote that he left me with, which I think is amazing, is be more concerned with your character than your reputation. Because your character is who you really are, whether as your reputation is merely what others think you are. So it takes much more courage for you to figure out who you really are and stop worrying about what other people think you are.